Hello and welcome to Kickback Science Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Luke. This podcast is your place to get the tools and knowledge necessary to navigate the world of health and wellness. So kick back, let's talk science. This is good content. This stuff has gone crazy. We'll jump into it. Let's dive in. Let's do a little science. I'm going nitty-gritty science right now.
I've been looking forward to this.
Kind of going on a little bit of a tangent.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot about that.
The information we discuss in this podcast is not meant to be taken as medical advice. It is simply informative. We're not affiliated with any organization or institution, just a few guys talking science and having fun. All right, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Kickback Science. So we got our special guest today, Dr. Cody Strom. Dr. Strom has a pretty extensive background studying the effects of exercise and nutrition in pregnancy, and so that's what we're going to talk to him about today. But before we get into that, Dr. Strom, will you tell us how you ended up where you're at? You know, what was your academic journey?
Okay, yeah. So I always like to talk to my students about my background, so I kind of have this somewhat polished. But if you don't mind indulging me, I usually like to start from the very beginning. When I was in high school, very big into sports as an athlete, and I did a lot of coaching even. And when I graduated and I didn't get a offer from any NHL teams, I was like, what the hell am I supposed to do now?
the Minnesota dream that everyone
my whole point was to be a professional hockey player. I didn't even have any college offers. So, you know what? Truth be told, I sucked.
I'm with you. I love the state of hockey banner in the background.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Repping.
So, as an 18-year-old, not knowing really what to do, I kind of floated around a little bit, but I continued to get classes in, I got my AA from a community college, and then eventually I landed at Mankato. I originally went there for pre-med, and then I switched to physical therapy, and then occupational therapy, then back to pre-med, then back to physical therapy, then back to pre-med. And it just kind of was like this jumbled mess, not really knowing what to do. And I was kind of torn because I loved the science. I loved biology, and I loved learning about how the body, works. And then I also still had that athlete in me. So I ended up taking some exercise science classes as when I was still pre-PT. And I really loved that aspect of it. It was like more, both these loves coming together. And it wasn't until I talked to an old mentor of mine prior to Mankato, I was like, I don't know what to do here. I love exercise science and I love this pre-med biology. And I feel like I need to pick one. And he goes, well, why not do both? All right. So I actually am a dual major. I got my pre-med degree and I got my exercise science degree. And so, I still didn't really know what I wanted to do. And then it was when I talked to Bob, Dr. Pettit, and you guys need to get him on. He's a heavy hitter, right?
Yeah,
I learned
love to have him on.
Huh?
I'd love to have him on.
Yeah, I learned so much from him that I still use so much of that today. It's crazy. It's just way ahead of its time. And just to kind of tangent, I do this sometimes. Like the exercise physiology book, the main one that they use, they just started putting the critical power model in there.
Wow.
We were learning that stuff 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he was just way ahead of his time. He understands the things just so meticulously that it just, but yeah, he got me into research. In my last semester there, I was like, I need 2 credits, just to finish this up. And I've taken every single course and I can't take this or that. And he's like, well, let's just do research. So then I did a 3MT soccer study with him. And I presented at ACSM and I really fell in love with that aspect of it, that research aspect, getting to actually test something. And then he said, you were pretty good at this. Why don't you stick around for your master's? And I was like, I didn't really think of that as an option. But I did it. So I got into the master's program at Mankato and started doing little research projects, helping out the second year master students with their projects, and jumped in on doing he actually picked me to do the treadmill study, which we'd already done it for the bike. And so that was a kind of a big honor because that's a pretty big study,
Yeah.
that submax study, right? And I know you were a part of it.
Yeah, you paid it forward and helped my I was a clueless little undergrad student and then
Yeah.
you helped me you introduced me to the field of research through that
Yeah.
study.
I mean, and that's all it is, right? It's just kind of paying that stuff kind of forward. And, during my time in Mankato, I knew that I wasn't quite done yet. I was like, I want to keep going. So this is where, Bob told me, if you were really a top candidate for PhD work, you should look at some of these universities. And um, so, I looked at a few universities and I made a lot of mistakes along the way. I, you know, I messaged a few because you've done this process before where you talk to different PhD or different doctors and research labs to try and get into them and seeing if they have spots for PhDs. And I kind of had an offer from one, had a soft offer from another, like the soft offer better, and then they dropped me. And then I kind of ghosted the other one, and I come back tail tucked like, hey, what's going on? And they're like, yeah, we found someone.
Shoot.
Yeah, it was a shock to Sammy and I as well. So then my second mistake that I ended up making was Bob told me, he's like, you know what, you should look into East Carolina University. I was like, yeah, absolutely. I looked at it and it was like perfect for me. I always want to keep applied science. I want to make sure that my science means something, that it goes out in the field and people can actually get that tangible information from it, right? There's plenty of people out there that just do a downstream enzyme, right? Like a lot of diabetes research right now is looking at, one particular growth factor or enzyme or something like that, and how do they upregulate or downregulate, but it's like not really feasible for the population, right? So I really always wanted to do that kind of stuff. The mistake that I've made is that I emailed all the labs in one email.
Somebody please let me in.
Please let me in. Yeah, I promise I'm gonna do well. Like it didn't matter who I got in with, and I was like, ooh. So yeah, and rightfully, all those labs ghosted me. We laugh about it now because I know all those labs now, like all those professors in those labs, and so
Do they remember that email coming through?
That spam email you said?
they've never brought it up, but there definitely was a little awkward moments when I very first met them.
Yeah.
But then after that, it was fine. That's like they're the salt of the earth down there. I love the kinesiology and faculty down there. But anyways, that was in spring, and then it came past summer. I had no idea what I was gonna do, and I actually had a job almost lined up in Texas, and so Sammy, who is now my wife, girlfriend at the time, she was all planning on going to Texas and not me working down there. And then I just get this random email from Dr. Linda May, who you'll hear a lot about with this pregnancy research stuff. And she's like, hey, do you have time to chat? I want to talk to you about a PhD spot. So Dr. Bob Hickner, who was the program director, remembered my email and then passed it off to Dr. May, who came up to him and was like, hey, I have funding for a PhD student. I didn't realize this. So I was like, had an interview with her. We meshed, and she was like, all right, can you get down here next weekend? I'm like, wow. And then it was kind of funny because I was just like shaking at this point because I'm like, yes, I got in somewhere. And it was funny. I tried waking up Sammy to tell her the news because I saw the email in the morning and everything. And she's like, oh, well, let me sleep. I'm like, okay. But then as soon as she woke up, I was like, hey, I need you to read this email, showed it to her. And, this is how much I love her so much. And she just looks at the email and she just goes, okay, so when do we leave?
Yeah.
Like Texas was gone now. She knew that PhD was the route. And
that's awesome.
But then there was some hiccups happened, and there was actually the hurricane that shut down things in ECU. So I actually ended up starting in the winter semester, which made it a lot easier to kind of be palatable. Right.
Oh, yeah.
So, then I get to East Carolina University, and then I just started doing the pregnancy research. And admittedly, it wasn't something that I ever thought I would be doing. But it really meshed a lot of what I wanted to do. Again, it was that applied research. I got to use my background of training and coaching. And then I also got to go really deep into the physiology, the metabolic aspects, if you look at some of my papers, I did DHA and EPA.
Yep.
And, utilizing a lot of what I learned from Bob, I had to do a lot of logistics and problem solving and figure things out. Right. So, and I got to do every aspect of the study. I had to change the study to be fasting blood draws. I personally did phlebotomy. So I was actually doing the blood draws in the morning with the mothers and then doing the exercise trainings, then going into lab and running my samples through solid phase extractions and the LCMS, the liquid chromatography mass spectrometry. And then, consents, body comp, the ringer, everything that comes from that study I was doing. And it gave me just such a great experience from that. Really getting to dive into every little aspect of the research. I even did some grant writing unsuccessfully because it's really hard to get NIH grants. But I've recently gotten some grants, which are really nice. So,
Nice. Congrats.
And so, then getting to work under her, which, Linda's an incredible person. She's the nicest person ever, but is she a slave driver? She whips you. She gets you going.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. She's a hard worker. It's something where you're getting emails at midnight and 4 a.m. from her.
Oh, geez.
And but here's the thing: it's like when you're first starting out as PhD student, you're like, oh crap, I got to answer these. So you're answering.
Yeah,
And it wasn't
super
until
ambitious.
and then it's like at my final year, it was like, she's like, you don't have to answer those emails. I'm just sending them because that's when I'm thinking about it. I'm like, that would have been nice 2 years ago.
Yeah.
I'm like,
I
I
know
wasn't
exactly what
just.
you mean. I feel like that's anytime you get like a new job or you're in a new spot and right away you're like, oh, I got to do everything, I got to make people like me. And then you start to realize I got to start saying no to shit. Like, care about my own life.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm the same way. I'm even still like that. I jump onto so many different projects. I just love to be jumping on different things and seeing different things. And so, but Linda definitely taught me how to handle that kind of workload because it was everything that,
Yeah.
I was, I kind of joke around. I'm like, I was holding this study up by myself here, but not, it's her facilitating and everything, but it was just a lot of the logistics was on my end. But she really gave me that freedom to do a lot of that, right? So like developing the metabolomics arm, that was on my end, right? So I had to change the study protocol to do the fasting blood draws. I had to learn phlebotomy to do that side of the study and figure out the logistics of doing that. We incorporated resistance training and circuit training while I was there. They had done it before, but then they switched to just control anaerobic, and then we implemented it again. So I had to, develop that side of it. I had to develop our online database through RedCap. So it was a bit. And then luckily, so luckily, COVID happened in 2020, right? And that was like, I was planning on graduating in that spring. So I actually graduated in 3.5 years for my PhD. So I graduated a semester early because it just worked out a lot better to. See, I took forever to get my bachelor. I took 5 years to get my bachelor, so now I'm behind.
Yeah.
So I always feel like I got to catch up. But yeah, so when COVID happened, everything shut down. So now all of a sudden I had all this free time, and I'm like a lot of researchers where writing is like eating your vegetables, right? It's just you got to do it, but sometimes you push them off to the very end, and it takes a while. And so I had almost nothing written, and then luckily study shut down. So then I had 3 months of just straight writing to get everything done. And then it was funny. I was actually interviewing for, different jobs, and then COVID shut down even all flights. So I actually came to USI sight unseen.
Wow.
Wow.
And so, wrote the dissertation, got through that process. Couple hurdles on there. You always get like, the one person that's being a little bit difficult, but we got through it. Then I came to USI, and since then I've just been kind of kicking out some of that dissertation work and seeing really where that lab has gone. I still collaborate extensively with the pregnancy lab. So I'm really fortunate where I'm at now, where I can work on this longitudinal study. I can still have input. Anytime I want data to write, if I wanted to be first author, I can just ask. And, I'm working on a CTI paper right now. We're looking at actually implementing the 3MT or the 6MT treadmill and validating it for the pregnant women.
Oh,
So
nice.
I'm starting on that IRB now because we're using the bulky right now. And there's some moms that can't even do the bulky. And
What's,
so,
will you explain what the bulky is for us and the listeners?
yeah. So the bulky is similar to the Bruce test, where it is a treadmill protocol. And the bulky, if I remember correctly, I believe that it is 3 miles an hour, and then it increases in grade. It just continually increases in grade until, we get to about 85% of their heart rate heart rate max. And so once they get to 85%, then you extrapolate out and then you get that, the estimated VO2. And the reason why we do that is because we want to have them in fit and unfit categories. So we get a target heart rate that's going to vary. There's going to be some overlap, but it varies a little bit. If they're a little bit more fit, we want to get their heart rate up a little bit more to elicit an exercise response. If they're a little lower, then we want to have a little bit lower requirement. So the bulky is just a standardized treadmill protocol.
Sure.
And as we've learned, when we talk about the human body and how it reacts, it's not standardized.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're trying to both do it on the bike and the treadmill, actually, so that we can get a customized protocol for these women. And then they're on the treadmill for 6 minutes. Yeah, well, technically 11 minutes, 5-minute warm up, 5-minute cool down, but the 6-minute actual test.
Mm-hmm.
Or 16 minutes, excuse me. But that's way better because as we've seen in our kind of studies that we've done before, is a lot of these standardized treadmill protocols, they overestimate those of lower capacities, exercise capacities, and actually underestimate those that are of higher exercise capacity. So it's, we see this downward trend as the more fit they get, the accuracy is just wildly different.
Huh.
And that's detrimental to those, right, that are on the lower end because they're actually telling them they're healthier than what they are. And then some of them, you're telling them that they're the ones that are healthy and fit, you're telling them that they're less fit than they actually are. So, so that's one of the things that we're looking at trying to do and get more of a, it's a customized protocol that will really help those on all ends, right? And those in the middle. So, yeah, so I get to continue with that stuff and the longitudinal research, but then I kind of have this open research policy with my students here where if they want to look at something cross-sectional, then I will help facilitate that. So we looked at a study with exercising with masks using resting metabolic rate pre and post and looking at if there was any kind of glucose, lactate, or respiratory differences post. We've just submitted for ACSM for that one. And then we did a BMI study as well because we had a 3D body scanner that gives us hundreds of different lengths and circumferences. And we're trying to see if we can get a regression equation that can get us closer to body fat percentage that doctors can use rather than BMI. Because that's BMI, right? They use BMI, it's easy. They put in the height and the weight, and the computer can themselves.
Just automatically shows up on the patient chart.
So then, I'm obese.
I am too. I was going to say I'm obese as well.
Yeah. So
it's just, and the problem with BMI is it's not just people who have a lot of muscle. It's the opposite too, where you've got these sarcopenic aging individuals who have a really good BMI, but they're super unhealthy. So it works the opposite way too. That's cool.
Yeah.
So you guys, your vision with that is to assess, is it anthropometric measures of people that then will estimate body fat percentage instead of just height and weight?
Yeah. So it's it was actually during my technologies course that I had a student come up to me because I rip to shreds BMI and I rip to shreds things like BIAs. BIAs are the gremlins of the body comp world. They have a laundry list of rules in order to do it properly, and then if you don't read the directions correctly, then you're gonna overestimate or underestimate body fat. It's just ridiculous.
Right. And for the listeners, BIA, bioelectrical impedance, it's those you can get the handheld ones or the ones where you put your feet in, hands on electrodes. Yeah, InBody is a big brand that makes them, and it estimates body fat percentage. But yeah, you have to be fasted for a certain amount of time, refrain from alcohol, caffeine. It's hydration dependent. If you exercise beforehand, it's going to change it. If it's controlled, they're fairly accurate.
Did you take a shit this morning? That's another thing that's going to affect it. I can say that on here, right? You guys
Hell yeah, you can.
Okay, well, hopefully I don't get in trouble then from my university, but yeah, I'm not worried. But yeah, so anyways, like, so, and doctors don't even use BIs anyways, right? So
No.
even if they had the capacity to do it, I mean, yeah. So it was actually a student that came up to me and she goes, how would we go about this? And I was like, well, because this is, again, more of the Bob stuff, how do we do the logistics side of things? Well, if we want to do a regression equation, something that makes it easy for doctors, we really want to get a full body estimate, right? Because it is just volume. I mean, think about it. Muscle is very condensed, fat is not. So, I mean, you do have a little bit of lung capacity stuff that can change things, but it's fairly negligible. So we got a 3D body scanner. We have a bod pod here. And actually, USI is really fortunate. We have a DEXA bod pod and hydrostatic Wang tank right behind me. Like,
Oh, wow.
it's all in the
Jeez.
same lab. It's awesome. So it's kind of like Mankato, where we had bod pod and hydrostatic right in that same lab. That's really, and that's unique, really, even just having the two. So I mean, I have the three, now I have the 3D body scanner. We have a lot of cool stuff. But anyways, yeah, so I just said we need this. So we are cross-referencing the bod pod with the 3D body scanner and seeing what we can pump out through a regression equation. So hopefully maybe a doctor can go in and just measure the circumference of an arm while having height, gender, and then maybe physical activity rating, right? They just quickly check a box of what their activity rating is, and then maybe that can get us closer to what BMI is or what the body fat percentage is and make it really easy for doctors. So that's the plan on that one, right?
Yeah.
I know we want to talk about pregnancy stuff, but that's just
No, that's cool though. Yeah, cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, so it's just so I kind of have this meld of longitudinal research through the pregnancy studies and continuing with that, and then doing the the little small student projects. So anytime the students want to come up and try something out, I love helping them. Like, hey, let's write a small little grant. Let's get some money. Let's get some equipment in here, and let's do this.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Kind of where I've been now for the last. This is my 5th year now at University of Southern Indiana. So getting a little school now.
That's awesome, dude. Let's get into the beef of the the
nitty gritty,
the stuff we're dying to know.
Sure.
So we're kind of at this age where it seems like everyone is getting pregnant or has been pregnant and has kids. Reed's got a couple kids.
dose of them.
My brother-in-law is behind the camera. He's the editor. He's sitting in here listening too. But him and his wife are, what are you, Joe? 20?
Luke says
2 weeks pregnant? Yeah. I say him and his wife. Him and my sister. 21 weeks pregnant. Yeah. So yeah, everyone. I mean, we're at this age where these conversations come up a lot, as far as like, all these things that happen during pregnancy and everything that changes with your body. What's normal? What's not normal? And then what's the role that exercise plays? I just did my like a brief OB-GYN stint at the clinic that I'm working at. Didn't get a ton of exposure, but I did notice like exercise wasn't really brought up. And we did ask a bunch of people for some questions that have come up for them when they're pregnant. But before we get into all that, like what changes when you're pregnant, and then how does exercise play a role in that? And that's very broad, but we'll kind of see where the conversation goes from there.
Sure, absolutely. So let's kind of start at, I know we're going to go back in the past a little bit, right? So let's think about the late 19th century, 20th century. That's when doctors are starting to really focus on the health of the mother and the baby a little. And they start actually, at that point, they theorized or hypothesized that physical activity was detrimental, right? If you see, they probably saw some more of like one-offs where someone overexerted themselves and they had some kind of complication, right? And so it was for a while, back again in that 20th century, where if someone got pregnant, everyone's like, oh my God. And then they treated them like with the kid gloves, right? And they're like, you can't be doing this, can't be doing that. And they actually said anything past like typical housework, you shouldn't do. Okay. But now let's think of, and kind of some of the reasoning and other examples of it was that they thought that when the mother was exercising, and think about just basic exercise, what happens during exercise, particularly with like blood flow redistribution?
you're going to distribute to the muscles away from the organs.
Exactly, right? Cardiac output increases to the muscles, the higher percentage to the muscles, and then the mother needs that oxygen. So they theorize that there's going to be a competition of oxygen from the mother from the fetus. So the mother's going to be taking more of that. So then the fetus actually has this hypoxia.
Huh.
And then when you don't have that, you don't have oxygen, so you don't have energy, and so you don't have growth. So you attenuate the fetal growth, and which they theorize further that would potentially lead to miscarriages. So that's where that first aspect comes from, or even just preterm delivery. But that's just not the case. Okay. So we do sometimes see that the blood that goes to the fetus might be a little bit deoxygenated because the mother is taking more. But the infant or the fetus actually has an exercise response.
Oh, so interesting.
So let's dive back even further than the 19th century. What happened back in the 1700s, 1800s when women would get pregnant out on the farm?
I don't know. I wasn't there.
I know, right? Well, here's what would happen, right? They would just say, "Oh, okay, you're pregnant. Okay, well, we'll deal with that when the baby comes," and then they go back to work in the fields.
Sure.
Right? There wasn't any bed rest back then, really, unless there was actual complications. So we're starting to get back into that, which is nice, right? Not treating because they are a special population. The maternal pregnant population is a special population, but we've since seen that exercise is not detrimental. In fact, there's so many aspects of it that are beneficial. And I mean, it's metabolic, cardiovascular, the body composition of the infants changes. I mean, the mitochondria changes. There's so many factors that we can get into. So let's just talk about, when I talked about how the fetus actually has an exercise response. So the catecholamines, when you exercise, will actually cross the placental barrier and then increase the fetal heart rate. So then what is the fetus now doing?
Exercising.
Nice. Exactly. The fetus is actually exercising. They are increasing their cardiac output. The blood is a little more deoxygenated, but they increase heart rate. So then they're getting more of that blood through. And so then we're actually seeing an exercise response. So
that's crazy.
Yeah. Right.
But it makes so much sense too. Mm-hmm. It also does make sense that, like, you think back to the early 1900s, like the the hypoxic environment for the fetus. Like, I get that thought process, but man, that sucks that, like, they just decided that was what's going on without actually testing it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they did test and they saw the hypoxia, but then they don't really. I mean, so right there, that's not like seeing the whole picture.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. If you have a little less oxygen, but now you increase the amount of blood going through.
Sure.
And also I think they've shown that the fetus actually can change kind of the myogenics a little bit so that they can actually pull more oxygen from the blood as well. So even if it's a little more deoxygenated, they can get more of it off of like the hemoglobin.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so again, that's just all exercise. That's exercise training. That's exercise effects that we're seeing.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to really change that. And it's unfortunate that happened. And then now we're trying to reverse that again. Right. And so we've seen that individuals that, for like guidelines that we'll talk about, and I'm sure we'll talk about them a little bit more, but I mean, those that have not exercised before can start moderate intensity exercise and be completely safe. So, I mean, there's a few little things that you need to be aware of, particularly with more resistance training stuff. But really, when you're doing the things of like cardiovascular training, I mean, it's pretty basic. You can do that and be safe.
What would those things be that they need to watch? Like somebody that doesn't work out and then starts working out while they're pregnant.
So one of the things that actually happens during pregnancy is that you will actually see a drop in blood pressure. Okay, so there's just more vasodilation, mean arterial pressure decreases, so that you actually see a decrease in blood pressure. I remember when I was first doing the pregnancy study, when I was taking blood pressure, which I'm very proud of me being able to take good blood pressures. And I was consistently getting blood pressures like 110/70. Then it was like all of a sudden I'd get like a 100/60. I'm like, what is happening here? So and then I ended up, actually learning like you do in a PhD program, and that happens, that the blood pressure you expect to decrease throughout pregnancy, and then it might kind of climb up a little bit by the end again. But you do have a chance of fainting sometimes if individuals, particularly if they're already in that hypotensive state a little bit, but then they can also go hypoglycemic. They're a little more prone to it if they have like a high glycemic index food. If you've ever had a workout where you've taken a high glycemic index food, you kind of couple that with the insulin response and then the exercise response that, takes in glucose into the cell without the need of insulin, you kind of double that up. You might feel a little lightheaded in your workout maybe, but with the pregnant women, it is a little bit more pronounced, right?
Okay.
So, I even had a pregnant woman faint on me during the fasted blood draw because she went hypoglycemic on me.
It wasn't because you're so darn handsome.
I know. Right?
Oh,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the back to the blood pressure real quick before we continue on with that. Like the drop in blood pressure, like why do so many women get like preeclampsia? And like what's going on there?
So, the mechanisms for preeclampsia are not super clear, right? It is very tough to kind of pin down. We're really only seeing things of like how to kind of prevent it, if that makes sense. Like the mechanism for it, I mean, we can have individuals that are healthy as can be. And I can actually speak to experience from this because my wife, Sammy, had it when we had our son, Asher. So, I mean, and she runs every day. She ran almost every day while she was pregnant.
That's
and
awesome.
it's thankful that she did. I mean, you should see my kid. He's just a muscle hamster.
Maybe he'll get the NHL contract.
Yeah, I know. He's got the NHL contract in him. He's probably already being scouted. But so she had it. I mean, she was a runner. She ate very healthy. It just kind of happens sometimes. But we can try to mitigate those, and we've seen that exercise can prevent a lot of those complications, like preeclampsia. It can decrease that. Preterm birth. So we see mothers that go further into pregnancy, which get close to that 40 weeks is what really what you want. So it's I can't give you a straight answer because no one really knows the exact mechanism that causes all of a sudden it just boom. Because you start seeing those pressures and then you start seeing those proteins in the blood, and that pressure just starts pushing those proteins out of the, those tissues and everything. And so then that's where you start having a lot of complications. So like for my wife, for instance, they waited right to the day she got 37 so that she could be full term, early term, and induced her. Because of how much those complications can happen. But again, they don't know exactly what can derive it. I mean, we know some risk factors: poor diet, or physical activity, high body fat percentage. Those can lead to that. But then you also do see those that have all those and no issues with blood pressure whatsoever.
Yeah.
So it's
kind of an anomaly.
It is right now. So unless there's something out there right now that I haven't looked into, but as of right now, I don't believe that there's really anything that's concrete enough to say this is what causes it.
So do those patients who have preeclampsia, do their exercise recommendations? Well, I think I'm getting a little ahead with this question of like recommendations, but so maybe I'll halt on that. What are the like current exercise recommendations for pregnant women? Like what's the governing organization? Is it the ACSM, and what are they recommending for pregnant women?
So we really do follow it's kind of like a collaboration. Like there's ACSM and then what is it? The ACOG, so the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, gynecologists, and the American Sport Medicine. They all come together on that, and they have very similar guidelines, and it is still trying to hit that 500 MET minutes per week. That is kind of the minimum guidelines that they want you to hit. But they're coming out with more specific things, which is really cool. Like hitting certain milestones and certain levels of MET minutes per week can actually see different kinds of effects. So For instance, I think it's in order to actually see benefits from like postpartum depression, I think you need to hit 644 met minutes per week, something like that. And in even my studies, I did quadratic regressions in my dissertation. I didn't do them for my actual papers, but in my dissertation, we saw in order to start seeing benefits of infant body composition, you needed to hit 366 met minutes per week. That's when you would start seeing a decrease in infant body comp.
Can you put that into normal people terms in terms of like what would that look like for somebody in a given week?
So 366 met minutes per week is actually under guidelines. So if you hit 150 minutes, 3 sessions of 30 minutes, and walking on a treadmill, I think at around 3.2 miles an hour, that would be 500 met minutes per week. So really, if you walk 2 days a week at about 3.5 miles an hour at 50 minutes on a treadmill, that would get you to that 366.
Oh, cool. Okay, so it's a pretty low threshold in terms of the impact that it has. And you said that impacts postpartum depression, because that was a question that one of the listeners wanted to know is like, we know exercise impacts anxiety and depression, and we know it's beneficial during pregnancy, but does it impact that postpartum depression as well? And the answer to that is yes, and it looks like it doesn't take much, huh?
Well, so that one is actually the 644. So that one is a little bit more. So that is, you're probably looking at higher, either, you got to just change one of the fit principles that we talked about, frequency, intensity, or time. Okay. So if you can get up to that, so that's like an extra 150 met minutes, which would be an extra session. So if you get 4 sessions in a week, that's where you would see that. And I will say that with the depression stuff, there's a lot of low correlations currently with that. They really only saw it with supervised exercise training, and reaching that level is when they would finally see it. The studies right now just aren't as robust, and so we haven't. They've kind of had some very low correlations to the mood and the anxiety right now, but it's all fine tuning and finding where it's at. But yeah, if you have a supervised exercise session, because we know that supervised rather than leisure time, you're gonna work a little bit harder, so you're probably getting up. And so if you're able to get to that 644 met minutes, that's when you start seeing reduced effects of those anxieties and depression postpartum. So, but for 366, that's infant body fat percentage. So that's just implanting on the baby. So that's just 2 days a week can make your baby healthier.
Yeah. That's so crazy. Like the impact that like from mom to baby, your lab at East Carolina, you guys did some work on obesity and how maternal obesity influences the baby's risk of obesity and metabolic issues and such. That was a scrambled blabber, but like is obesity present in utero, like the risk for the infant itself, and talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So to answer your question shortly, yes.
Yeah.
So Michelle Matola, she's this researcher up in Canada. She's like the heavy hitter. Okay. There's plenty of them up there, and all around the world, like Ruben Bearcat and Margie Davenport and stuff. I've met both, a few of them, but Michelle Matola said it best in one of her papers, very short and sweet. Obesity begets obesity.
That's what it is. I couldn't think of the term.
There it is. So obesity begets obesity, right? And so what that's just telling you is that it's cyclical. It's a positive feedback loop. If your mother's obese, there's a higher chance of the baby being obese. I really wish I could pull it up. I got to remember where it's at though. But it's there was a case study actually done with a mother that had a baby, and that was obese, and she had a baby, and then that baby, was predisposed for obesity and diabetes and all that. And then she ended up having a gastric bypass and losing weight. And then she had a second baby, and guess what? Didn't have those markers.
Crazy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's just, and it comes down to this whole in utero environment that we're talking about here. And so, we think about these negative effects of smoking, drinking, and even that sedentary style that we talked about, or being obese, having these different metabolic conditions. And we know that these adverse effects have negative effects on the fetus. So this is where that exercise comes in. It's a positive thing. Like if you have a good diet and you exercise, you're creating a positive in utero environment. It's a very flexible environment that we have. It's just like anything else, right? Our bodies are going to adapt. There is this one, so it's like this, it was Barker and Hales that looked at the, blood pressures of individuals and then how it propagated through life, and then what, and they did a twin study that looked at the comparison as well. And so what I'm trying to get at here is so they really see that how the baby comes out, I mean, it sets them up for life, right? There's things that you can do, modifiable risk factors, but we can actually have intervention through prevention prior to the baby even being born. So there's all these different effects. So we talk about like exercise, like those that are obese and they have obese babies. Now we've actually seen that even those that are obese can exercise and they're going to have better outcomes for their babies. We talked about those that are sedentary, that are going to exercise, they're going to have better birth outcomes than those that have exercised and then stopped exercising during pregnancy. So, I mean, those that are higher fitness levels, not exercising, actually look worse off than those that were they actually look worse than those that didn't exercise before and then continue not to exercise.
Oh,
So
wow.
the detraining effect is actually worse.
Wow. That's crazy.
Never would have guessed that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's crazy. But yeah, and so these people that are going from inactive to active are having positive effects. Active is staying really positive. And I mean, we get all sorts of different changes that occur. So
that's so shitty because you got people that are so concerned and don't know if they should exercise when they're pregnant. And like these, let's say like a marathon athlete for example, gets pregnant and gets told that they shouldn't exercise, and they're now creating a worse environment in utero than somebody who's never exercised before.
I used to have a lot of clients that actually, probably like a handful, that would stop training afterwards. I'm like, it's healthy, it's good for you, and then they went with what their doctor said, which I understand. But yeah, I see that a lot. People go from exercising with me to like not exercising at all because they're worried about potential risk factors of that.
Damn.
But let's segue that into like, what exercises would you not recommend a female being pregnant to do? I obviously it's like prone exercises. Obviously you don't want to lay on your stomach, but what are some other ones if somebody's looking to start exercising while they're pregnant? What would you not recommend they do?
So there's not really a lot, honestly, that they really can't do. I mean, you don't want them
Like heavy squats or like heavy back squats.
Yeah, you don't want to be doing like a lot of the heavier stuff. You want to keep things in those higher rep ranges. You don't want them laying flat on their back doing like a chest press. You want to always kind of do some incline with that.
Okay.
Really you can actually have a lot of mothers be doing a lot of different floor work up until about in between 24 to 28 weeks.
Okay.
That's when you start backing off of some of those other exercises and stuff and try to keep them a little bit more comfortable, keep that incline. But we've had mothers that were doing planks all the way up until the end.
Okay. Yeah.
So they're not prone on their belly, obviously.
Yeah.
There's some of them that would still do some little floor work stuff, like little penguins.
Yep.
Right? They're doing that. But yeah, that's really what you want to watch out for. And then the other thing is you don't want to do any, especially 24 to 28 weeks after that point, you don't want to do anything that's coning, right? So as they start growing, that you don't want them doing sit-ups because it creates a uteral coning that you don't really want to see. I know that there are some myths out there too about some of the exercises. They talk about now I'm forgetting the actual term. It's where the actual abs will split.
Yeah.
And sometimes they attribute that to exercise, but there's actually no correlation to that whatsoever.
Okay.
So really, again, it's just, you don't want them obviously flat on their back, lifting heavy weights. I wouldn't put them on a leg press, right? Because that's going to really change blood pressure way too much. And that's something that you don't want to do.
Incline?
Yeah. That deep, sitting down in that inclined leg press, but you can do like flat leg press. Yeah, that would be fine. That would be absolutely fine. Just sitting up and doing that leg press. We had moms do that all the time. So yeah, I mean, as long as you're careful about that aspect of it, for the resistance side of things, that's a little bit more of what you need to worry about. Now, what's really cool is the aerobic side of things. You can actually maintain the same level of your activity prior to. So if you were doing vigorous activity, you are safe to continue that vigorous activity.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because that was another question we had. Like
Mhm.
some doctors recommend don't go in above 140 in your heart rate. So like people with HIIT training, they love it, or like CrossFit, they usually get their heart rate up real high. So that is a myth,
They
and
they
it's safe to do that.
Yeah,
yes.
that's a recommendation
Yeah.
that one of our listeners had was don't go above 140.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, what does that even mean? Like,
No, so they did a study out in South Africa with elite athletes that were pregnant, and they showed that they were completely safe to continue their training.
And is
So,
that the same case for people that are not elite athletes? So
so
somebody kind of sedentary and then they start working out.
see, yeah, so you're safe to go from sedentary to moderate,
Yeah,
but
oh, moderate. Yep,
you
that's
would
right.
not want to go to vigorous activity.
Okay.
Even those that are at a moderate intensity, it's probably not recommended for them to increase,
hmm,
right?
Okay.
It's more of so like the sedentary to the moderate effect is more of that we're going to see much the benefits are greatly outweigh the any kind of detriments. There's
Okay.
really not. It's safe at moderate, right?
Hmm.
Any chance, I mean, they're going to have the same instance rates of any kind of event happening as normal population going to moderate intensity, right?
Hmm.
So no inherent added risk.
sure.
So they're fine there. But like those that are already doing vigorous, they are completely safe to do the same level of output. Kind of a funny anecdote there. We had a mother that was a very incredibly fit marathon runner, and it got to the point where she was 36 weeks and she could no longer do the treadmill because, she was pregnant and it was
Hmm.
so much strain. She even had the belts and everything holding it up, but it was just so much pain and strain. So she moved to the elliptical. She was in such great shape. She could not get into the heart rate zone.
Oh, wow.
I literally was watching her just crush this elliptical, just going at it, drenched in sweat. And she's like, I can't get my heart rate up.
She's just too fit.
She was just too fit. She couldn't get up to her heart rate, her suggested heart rate level. So it's like, so if that person was saying 140, maybe the elite athletes can't even get to 140 because they're
Yeah.
already so fit. But yeah, I mean, that's just, again, that's just if you're saying 140, that's so standardized. Like, that's not going to benefit anyone. You got to really look at the individual and what they've been doing.
Okay. So
I mean,
summarize that just like a vigorous athlete, like a high-end athlete, you can stay in
continue.
that. But if you're
Stay at,
moderate, stay at moderate. Don't try to go up while you're pregnant. And then sedentary or somebody that doesn't work out very often, just go to moderate. Don't do that
yeah,
jump, especially.
yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Perfect.
What's
Absolutely.
the
Yeah.
risk?
Hmm?
So what are the specific risks? Like,
Oh,
what are you worried about with somebody going from moderate to vigorous who hasn't done vigorous? Is it just as we would worry with the general population, like injury?
Yeah, a little bit of the injury stuff, but then we do talk about like that cardiovascular risk factors that can happen, the strain that can occur on that system, right? So it's just a little extra inherent risk that we're taking that we don't really want, right? So it's, we could elicit a little bit more of that, what they talked about with that hypoxia. It's more of like cautionary, really, than
Yeah.
anything. Um, like we don't want to have some kind of event like that occur where they do, have some kind of receptor that doesn't respond correctly, like a baroreceptor, and then we have them go into they have a syncope and faint on us, and that's an inherent risk, or that increase in blood pressure with doing a higher intensity resistance training. We don't want to see those kinds of effects, right? Because that can lead to some detrimental things. Like a preterm birth. Like we've actually, um, we didn't have a preterm birth, but we did have a mom that went into labor an hour after a workout.
Wow.
Yeah,
Crazy.
she
Just
was
planked right into birth.
she was 39 weeks pregnant, and then
oh, okay. I was like, oh.
yeah. So I mean, but so exercise can do that.
That's
So there's
awesome.
actually quite a few little things that can actually elicit that.
Okay.
So, but yeah, it's
Can
just
it elicit it early on or just kind of towards the end?
just maybe by towards the end a little
Oh,
bit.
okay.
But the thing is that we actually, so our studies have actually shown compared to our control groups actually deliver earlier than our exercise groups. So, our control group, I'd have to look, but I know older data that we had seen, like preliminary data. Our control group was seeing their births at around 38.9 weeks. And then we had our resistance group at like 39.4. And then our combination group was like 39.6. And then our aerobic group was 39.9. Like almost
Wow, that's
on the
interesting.
dot. And we want that, right? Because that's all a lot of development occurs. Like people don't realize, and that's another thing where it's like people that are doing these elective C-sections right when they become full term at like 37, 38 weeks, like
Yeah.
there's a ton of neural development that occurs in that time frame. Now, we hypothesize right now that exercise can actually help with that right away. So we can actually see more neurological effects. So we're recently publishing a paper now, it's in submission right now about 1 month neuromotor aspects and infant body composition with exercise, right? So we can see that there's neurological adaptations that are also occurring, like positive neurological adaptations. And I mean, we already see that in the cardiovascular stuff that I can get into as well, like better myelination and everything of like the vagus nerve is occurring. So we have all this other aspects of it too that, so Sammy, my wife, exercised every day, 37 weeks, had to deliver for, her health and the baby's health. And, I was really worried about the neurological stuff, right? They have, social delays and cognitive delays that are associated with those that are delivered at 37, even 38 weeks. But we've seen none of that with my son. And we attribute a lot of that to the exercise that we
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
So like when we have a whole episode just on like why exercise is just the freaking bomb.
Yeah.
And we talk about like, so exercise impacts cognitive function, cardiovascular function, pulmonary function, gut health, you name it. So in this microenvironment is changing in the uterus itself. Are all those impacts, like it sounds like what you're saying is like everything that we would see from the benefit of exercise in the mother is happening in the fetus. Is that
Yeah.
true?
Mhm. Absolutely. So,
That's legit.
okay, let's so I mean there's so much information that we can talk about with this. All right. So, let's start cardiovascular. Okay? Let's just start with cardiovascular system.
Yeah.
So, on your show, I don't know, have you talked about heart rate and heart rate variability?
We haven't really talked about heart rate variability. We went really in depth on like stroke volume and exercise and like what happens with cardiac output and stuff and the Fick equation. Whoops. But we haven't talked about heart rate variability.
Okay, sure. So I'll just sum up heart rate variability really quick. So we have our heart rate, and that's our average beats per minute, which you probably already talked to your listeners about. So, when you have your Apple Watch heart rate monitors, it takes, 10, 15 seconds because it's getting an average. Now, heart rate variability is this dynamic kind of change of time between your R&R intervals, right? So your heart doesn't beat exactly at a perfect cadence. It's like beep, 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 right? So it's just there these differences, and those differences are good. That's the interplay between your parasympathetic and your sympathetic nervous system. It's showing how they are kind of interplaying, and then you're able to adjust to this environment. And so you want low heart rate and higher heart rate variability. Now, myelination of the vagus nerve happens around 34 to 36 to 37 weeks of gestation. And what we can actually see is that exercise will actually enhance that myelination. Because again, we talk about it. What is the infant or the fetus heart doing starting exercise? Right? It's having an exercise response as well. So it needs to develop and it needs to kind of adapt to that environment. The whole thing of the uterus or in the fetus is it's trying to gauge at what kind of environment it's going to be born into. So it needs to have that myelination and so you actually code for that. It's like the sonic or hedgehog gene, something like that. It's close to like it, in that it'll actually get expressed more, so it actually will myelinate more. So right there, we're seeing that cardiovascular function, and we see that heart rate and heart rate variability at birth actually predicts it up to 5 years of age and even, or 10 years of age and even further on. So exercise is actually shown to decrease infant heart rate and increase infant heart rate variability. So right there, that's cardiovascular.
That's great.
Now, let's go even further into some cardiovascular and look at like lipids. So a mother that's exercising, so we had a couple studies that were done that looked at lipids. One of my studies, for instance, saw that so as pregnancy progresses through, you go through this metabolic switching. So the mother is going to primarily use carbs in the first, early pregnancy, okay, first and into the second trimester. They're going to be mostly using glucose, okay? And that very first part of pregnancy is more so for development, right? They're trying to formulate the organs and the vestigials, limbs and all of that. But then when we get into the later pregnancy, the mother will do this metabolic switching because the fetus now needs more energy because it needs to grow, right? So now we're getting into the growth phase. And so now the fetus is going to use more glucose and get more of those proteins and those aminos. And the mother is going to use more of the triglycerides. So we typically see an increase in cholesterol and triglycerides through pregnancy. But there can be a problem when we have too much of an increase. Because if we have really high cholesterol and triglycerides and LDLs, which is the bad cholesterol, so low density lipoproteins, they've actually seen that the fetus actually will get more of those triglycerides and those LDLs, and it kind of facilitates some of these different transport proteins to bring more of that in. And they've actually seen fatty streaks in the aorta at birth. So that's
so atherosclerosis is developing in utero as well. That's crazy.
Utero. Yep. So exercise mitigating that rise in triglycerides and LDLs, keeping a much better lipid profile, is keeping the baby healthy, keeping the fetus healthy. So when it's born, it's not predisposed for atherosclerosis. So right there, that's another aspect of it. So that's both, metabolic and cardiovascular.
Wow.
There's this, and we talk about birth weight itself, and there's this U-shaped curve of odds ratio for risk of diabetes. So those that are born underweight, so less than 22.5 kilograms, and those that are over 4.0 kilograms have a greater odds ratio of developing diabetes. One is coming into an environment thinking there's no food, so it's very much wanting to store and not use up anything. And then the other one is thinking, oh, we're storing a lot of stuff here, we might have a starvation state coming. So then that's
sure.
Obese and everything. So it's like this, we want this, we're trying to get right in that middle there. So exercise can help with that large for gestational age and also small for gestational age. Even large for gestational age, the larger the BMI of the mother, we see the babies have that same trend. How large they are at birth is correlated to how large they are at 1 year. 1 year is correlated to up to 5 years, and then 5 years is up into adulthood. There's a few gaps in between there, but we see that increase. So now exercise can help mitigate that. And so kind of going even a little bit deeper into what we see is we can see different kinds of DNA methylation and phosphorylation on certain expressions. And so we can actually downplay some expression and increase other expressions so that we're creating, healthier babies. So we can elicit. So there's some studies that are being done at East Carolina right now that I wish I could have really been a part of, but I do a little bit when I get to read the papers, but they're actually taking stem cells from the umbilical cords and differentiating them into different fat cells and myotubes. So it's really cool what they're able to do. And they're actually able to look at like the mitochondria and their capacity and their effect. And they're seeing that mothers that exercise, that they're doing more complete beta oxidation of fats than the mothers that don't exercise, like on those stem cells, those cord stem cells. So those are directly going to the fetus. Those are directly going to the babies. So we're seeing more lean mass, less fat mass, and even with those different adipocytes, we're seeing much better, more complete beta oxidation. Like,
Yeah, that's crazy. Which for the listeners, so beta oxidation, we've talked a little bit about, but that's where you're breaking down triglycerides and using them as energy. Um, that's wild. So then you also had this, your PhD dissertation. You looked at EPA, DHA. Did you supplement mothers with, like a fish oil supplement, for example? Should moms be taking this? What kind of results did you see there?
so yeah, that kind of yeah, I didn't have to do a supplemental trial. So this is kind of where the mass spec came in. We were, I was we did a lipid paper early on, and I knew that I wanted to do more of a whole, you know, encompassing thing where I'm looking at different substrates and different biomarkers or lipids and glucose a little bit. But glucose is sexy. Everyone loves glucose, but everyone doesn't really look at the fats, right? And so I started looking into things like DHA and EPA because they are supplements that is recommended to take DHA. It's good for retinal development and brain development. It creates better lipid rafts and everything. So, it in what really stemmed the driving into doing an exercise with the DHA and EPA research was that it was another researcher that Dr. Linda May works, collaborates with and talks with quite often is Kathleen Gustafson, and she does a lot of DHA and EPA stuff. And she saw we looked at like different heart rate variabilities, and she saw that, with more DHA and EPA, heart rate variability was going up on these infants. And we saw that with exercise. So they were like almost right on top of each other. So we're like, let's try to look at this. So in order to do that, we didn't want to add a supplemental trial. So this is again where logistics, Bob comes in. And I'm like, okay, so what if we looked at the DHA and the EPA in the blood? But we can't look at the plasma because plasma is short term. So we need to look at the red blood cells because DHA and EPA will, get into those red blood cells, and eventually, we can see the composition of those red blood cells actually change. It's a long-term effect of continual DHA supplementation. So we can actually see, rather than they ate fish the night before, we can actually see how much they're actually getting in, and then see more of their composition of their from their red blood cells. So that's where we actually just measured it from the red blood cells. So we were actually seeing their levels of DHA and EPA in the blood rather than just doing the supplemental trial. So, which kind of a funny story there is another Bobism is I was spending thousands of dollars trying to lyse these red blood cells. But you need to lyse them enough and break them up enough that you can extract those molecules, right? Those compounds, the DHA and the EPA. And, it's all just method development, trying to get these things off. And I was just sitting there, just looking up all these different research. I'm like, God, is it a ratio of acetonitrile with methanol, or do I need to do this? And then you're looking at, cyanide in there and things like that. And it's like, God, what do I need to do here? Then I thought of Bob.
Just to lyse the red blood cells?
To really lyse them, yeah.
Huh.
There's other things you can do, but it's weird. Like, in order to get what I needed to get, you needed to kind of be pretty precise with it. But then I thought, well, what do we do here? And I was like, what would Bob do? He's like, think of the physiology. And I was like, I thought really deep into the physiology, and it was just like, oh, I can just use water. Because water makes them hypertonic.
Sure.
Pumps them up. And then what does water do? What's unique? One of the unique properties of water is that when it freezes, it expands. So did 3 freeze thaw cycles, worked like a charm. So so I was able to lyse them.
What would Bob do?
What would Bob do?
Huh?
What would Bob do?
What would Bob do? Yeah, that's kind of a motto whenever I'm thinking too hard about something. I'm like, what would Bob do? So we were able to extract the DHA and the EPA right off of the red blood cells, and I ran them through a solid phase extraction, which is just a lot of pipetting through these little syringes that have a really hard filter, and it lets certain metabolites through, and then you're able to wash out the metabolites that you want. So it was basically I would load them through, wash out the metabolites I didn't want, and then I would put another compound in that with some acid that would actually then extract out the DHA and the EPA. Then we put them on a mass spec. And so that would quantify the very minute amount, and we're able to then compare from there. So anyways, now getting into that research then. So what we ended up seeing was that exercise had a greater effect than the DHA and the EPA. But that's not to say that the DHA and the EPA didn't have any kind of effect. If you look at some like the papers on like the lipids and even the body comp, they're close to significance. So I should have done a little bit more on that in my, admittedly, I should have looked at more of effect size and maybe looked at, because there's actually clinical relevance now too that they look at. So is it even though it's not significant, is it clinically relevant? And I would probably say if I were to go back and do that paper and actually look at that side of things, I would say yes. They were so close. So I think exercise has a much stronger effect on maternal lipids and then infant body composition, but the DHA and the EPA definitely do help. So again, that's that diet and exercise creating positive environment.
So EPA and DHA, so eat more fish, and that's like the, I guess, Mediterranean type diet plus, do you, well, I'm not going to ask you recommendations because then we get into a slippery slope there, but the
I feel like prenatals has everything, like all the omega-6s in there. So if you don't like fish, you can supplement with that. Obviously, eating the real source, way better, but...
Or just exercise.
Exercise. I would say it's definitely both. And so, so one thing I can say is that our diets are not great over here. We all know that.
Yeah.
It's really this interplay between omega-3s and omega-6s. Okay. So DHA and EPA are omega-3s. That's the good polyunsaturated fatty acids. And then the omega-6s, I wouldn't say they're bad, but they're reactive. Let's put it that way. Okay. So that's where you're looking at like arachidonic acid and linoleic acid. So that is where we talked about like those fatty streaks occurring, right? Mm-hmm. Those are some of them, when those kind of start getting broken down with the LDLs and everything. So it's not just about getting those omega-3s in, it's actually just trying to create a positive ratio.
Sure.
Okay. So right now, the ratio for omega-6s to omega-3s in the US diet is anywhere between 16 to 20 to 1. And we really want to get that down to a 1 to 1 or even is up to a 4 to 1. So 4 to 1 of omega-6s to omega-3s, because our bodies actually want to use omega-3s. So this gets into like the prostaglandins, right? So the inflammation and all of this. So I have a slide that I show when I talk about some of this where it's, Will Ferrell, and he's in, semi-pro. And he's like, everybody panic. That's omega-6s. So you get a small little inflammation response. And if you have high omega-6s, they go full force. They are a full bred inflammation. Something's occurring, 5 alarm, this is huge. We're freaking out. Omega-3s are pro-inflammatory, but they're also anti-inflammatory. So depending on the response that we need, it's like, you get a small bump or bruise. And if you're, got a good ratio of omega-3s to omega-6s, your body wants to use the omega-3s, right? So omega-6s are jumping up like, hey, pick me. And then the omega-3s is like, hey, I'm here. And it's like, okay, you're going to do this. And then it might have a small inflammatory response, or it might have an anti-inflammatory response because it's like, we don't need this inflammation right there. So if we have that 4 to 1, these guys jumping around and then this guy just saying, hey, pick me, I'm better at this. Easy to pick. Now we got 20 to 1, all these guys right here, and then you have one omega-3 sitting there trying to be like, hey, I can do this, and then you have all these other ones. What's your body going to do? It's just availability of substrates. That's all it is. So it's not just about getting the omega-3s in, it's making sure that we're cutting down on the omega-6s as well. So that's going to be like your red meats, very high in omega-6s, certain nuts, right? So like almonds, for instance, they're great for omega-3s, but they're very high in omega-6s. The ratio is actually pretty bad. It's like, 12 to 1 or something. I'd have to really look it up. It's just coming off the top of my head here. But yeah, they're actually very high in omega-6s as well. So it's like, yeah, we're getting omega-3s, but we're also not contributing to lowering that ratio. Walnuts, though, very good. So, so that's kind of what you want to see, and then looking at the ratio. And unfortunately, again, hindsight 2020, I had the capacity to look for add arachidonic acid, but I didn't. And I shoot myself every day for that one because I think it could have told us a much better story. So, but yeah, with a lot of the prenatals, you're right, Reed, is going to have a lot of those omega-3s in there, and they're not going to really have much for the omega-6s, which is good. And that's
Okay. Perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Sweet. Also, and I want to be respectful of your time. So,
Oh, I got plenty of time. You guys you ask away.
You're the best. Well, I mean, I have just one more question before kind of getting into the misconceptions. Reed, you ask away too, but protein supplementation. I mean, if you talked about how like metabolism changes throughout pregnancy, and I imagine the growth of a fetus within your body requires quite a bit of amino acids to help with that. Are protein requirements, should pregnant women increase protein? Is that something we see, like protein deficiency, especially when you're exercising? Yeah. I ramble and then a question just comes out of it.
That's actually a really good one.
No, you're good. So, yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, I have not looked too much into the proteins with that, because we have the amino acid pool, and that is being shared, right? So, I mean, it's always good to have the protein there, and so it's broken down to those aminos because they are the backbones of everything that we're making, right? So we get the DNA, and then it goes into the ribosomes, and they are putting those amino acids together, and that's what's eventually creating enzymes and things like that. So, yeah, I mean, specifically, I can't really give you a strong answer on that one, I admit, but I do know that it is important because
Yeah.
of what
No,
I
that's
just
totally
said
fine.
before. And again, when the mother's exercising, she's sending out these different kinds of responses, and it's this thrifty phenotype, right? We've been talking about it. We're just trying to fine tune this environment for the fetus, and of course, it's going to be growing, and it's going to be developing, and it's making all these different enzymes. So yeah, absolutely, protein's important.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when you are exercising, because it's, so what's really kind of happening and sending a lot of these different shifts in the metabolism is the changes in like estrogen, and those estrogen levels rising, and then eventually getting into, the progesterone and all of that. So it is going to kind of change a little bit of how things are being broken down and given up. And so it is important to have that balanced diet, and making sure, again, omega-3s, making sure we're getting good carbohydrates. It's not like these processed sugars. And then, yeah, obviously it is about the protein as well, because we're already going into right away with that estrogen. What I was talking about is that in the very early pregnancy, we're in a anabolic state, or the pregnant women are in an anabolic state. And as the pregnancy progresses, we're going to start going into a catabolic state. And so if we have a lot of that catabolism, then yeah, it's going to be a little bit more important to have more of those available aminos in order, those building blocks that we need for the tissues and everything. So, and not only just for the fetus, but also to preserve, for the mom as well, right? Especially because, we have that muscle damage and those micro tears and everything. So yeah, absolutely. I really wouldn't necessarily say like a protein shake is required, like it is for, those that are really trying to train and gain those muscles. But again, just keeping the diet balanced enough, and kind of ensuring what you're taking in is, healthy. And it's harder and harder to kind of tease that out nowadays. But I would still say a little bit of staying a little bit more away from the red meats is good. Chicken's okay. Fish is great, but you got to kind of be worried as well about the mercury. So, tuna and stuff is a little bit, you kind of want to stay a little bit away from, and even some salmon that you can get to levels that are too much there. So, I mean, it's tough for pregnant women out there. They got a lot
Yeah.
to really
Yeah.
think about and watch out for. But again, if they keep their diet fairly balanced, then they really don't have much to worry about. It's those that are having the 2 a.m. cravings for Wendy's and cold cuts.
Yeah, cold cut. I was gonna say like Amy couldn't eat like a sandwich, a Jimmy John sandwich forever, and then that was like one of the first things she got.
Yep.
She's like, I need a sandwich. Give me a sandwich.
Spotted. So yeah, so sorry I can't give you too much on the protein side of things.
Well, study up, Cody.
I know. But yeah, and yeah, I just kind of want to just even mention a few of the like different studies too that kind of come out with some of the, pregnancy stuff. So did I mention the Vega mice diet study?
No, you didn't.
So this is one that is about kind of mitigating the effects of obesity, right? So there was this mouse study done that they had a high fat diet and then a normal diet, and then they had exercise, and then they had exercise with a high fat diet. And I'll have to send you the picture of it because it shows these mice together. And sorry, I'm kind of looking at it. So yeah, they had a control diet and then control with exercise. They had a morbidly obese, and then they had a morbidly obese rat with exercise, and they looked at the offspring. And the morbidly obese with exercise looks exactly like the control. So, I mean, right there, you're just seeing, that's more of like the applied and actually seeing it. So even if someone's morbidly obese, they can actually mitigate their own effects by exercise. And that's going down into those downstream stuff we talked about. There's, what is it? Acetylation of, the PPARY gamma, which is talking about like the adipogenesis side of things. So, I mean, there's all sorts of these different levels. I mean, we talked about the U-shaped curve, the cardiovascular aspects. I mean, even in my studies, we saw that babies were more fit, like they were leaner. We had exercise showed a positive correlation to subscapular fat fold thickness, tricep subscap thickness, or not subscap, sorry, tricep skin fold thickness, and even body fat percentage, right, was lower. And so it's, I mean, right there, we have a healthier, a leaner, fat-free mass baby. And, they might be a little bit lower on the weight side sometimes, but they're more muscle.
Yeah.
So it's less fat. And then we talked about like the aortic streaks and the cardiovascular aspects of it. And I mean, I can't stress enough of how beneficial exercise is during pregnancy. I mean, we see that cardiovascular disease is the number one killer in the US right now. And we can mitigate the effects of obesity, diabetes, metabolic disease, which all go into that. Right. And then we're decreasing atherosclerosis. Again, that's more cardiovascular risk factors that we're seeing. And we can mitigate all those effects. And we're starting to get deeper and deeper into the why that's happening. And it's growing and it's getting so much better. But it's really unfortunate, like you mentioned, that when you're in these med classes, they don't even talk about it.
Yeah.
You get one lecture on exercise in general. You don't even get it about special populations.
Yeah. There's no class on exercise. We just say, like, we'll learn about diseases and it's like, oh, exercise is good for this disease. And that's it. And it's just crazy. But yeah, that's a whole nother can of worms. As you're talking about all these benefits, just made me think like, man, it's easy being a guy.
Oh, let me tell you, we really got off easy, right? So, I mean, and even with like studies, there's the disparities just in gender studies for exercise science. It was something like in 2014 or 15, only like 20 or 30% of exercise studies had females in it.
Crazy. Yeah.
And so then that's now compound that with exercise and pregnancy. I mean, it's just, and I mean, yeah, they're already fighting an uphill battle. If you look at like the lipoprotein lipase, they have elevated levels of that at the hips, and why would that be?
Carrying babies.
Well, yeah, that's why they gain more fat there. It's like closer to the uterus and everything, and so they're already fighting this uphill battle where they tend to get more fat on them. I mean, their essential fat is already higher than what we need.
Mm-hmm.
We have a 2 to 4% of our fat, like a 2 to 4% body fat is essential for men, and then it's something like 8 to 10 for women.
That's crazy.
5 to 7, something like that. And so they're already fighting an uphill battle because they have an increased activity of these LPLs that want to pull in more fat anyways. And then on top of it, they have to get pregnant.
Yeah.
They have to
Well,
go- they have
and
to
then
go-
the future of the human race is within their hands. Like
Yes.
we're now telling them they have to exercise while pregnant so that we don't have increased obesity, cardiovascular
Yeah.
disease.
Yeah, I know.
It
It's like
starts with them.
Yeah.
it starts with you guys right off the bat.
That's
But
so
I will say
shitty,
that
but-
there's actually a few labs out there now, and there's even one in East Carolina too that is actually looking at spermatogenesis stuff. So I don't do any of that, but they actually look at the composition of the sperm and seeing how that actually changes with
That'll be so
men that exercise. So we can still kind of have that compound as well. So I mean, we still are a component to that. So they're showing that, yeah, there is a little bit of that comes from the men as well. But unfortunately, well, fortunate for us, I guess, but unfortunately for the women, most of the effects are going to come from them. But it's just like, marriage and anything like that. We get a little input.
Yeah. Exactly.
So yeah. So it's not just all on them. We can do our part. Okay.
Take a quick intermission.
Oh, sure.
Dad, it's been a minute since we saw you.
Yeah.
I feel like last time I saw you was South Africa. We might have hung out afterwards, but that's been like
It's
2000,
been a while. Absolutely.
2015.
I still think about your card, your student card.
Oh yeah,
You
like a picture.
It makes me die laughing every time because it's not just that you put that picture in there, but it's because the fact that you said, well, if they need to find me, it's like, so that was the best picture.
That's probably how they'd find me is. Yeah, I forgot
I think
about
Sammy
that.
has that stored somewhere because I think she took a picture of it.
When we went to Nelson Mandela University, correct? Yeah, and we had our student ID cards, and we needed like one picture to put as like our student ID, and my picture was like, and so they had to like print it off, and like if they lost me, that was my picture.
I forgot about that too.
Oh gosh. So let's dive into like misconceptions. I know we talked about a little bit stuff like the heart rate and exercise is good. But what are physicians telling pregnant women now? Because I know you've been studying them. Like, are they telling them something that isn't true, or is it kind of on pace? Because I mean, we're talking about how physicians just touch upon exercise. They don't really go into it. They're like, yeah, it's good, but they don't really go in the whole science of it.
Or maybe not even like just physicians. Like,
Yeah.
what do you hear that's
Yeah,
a
like
misconception
social
that you're
media
like,
too.
nah, that's not true.
There's stuff that you see out there that you're like,
Yeah, so I'll say that it's gotten less, which is nice. And I think a lot of that attributes to back in what was it, 2004, I think, or 2004, 2008, when ACSM and the American Medical Association, they kind of came together and made that exercise as medicine. So it's opened the door a little bit more, and so we're starting to see also a lot of those doctors that are proponents for like the bed rest or any little maladaptation that they see, they're like, oh, stop doing this. And we're starting to see them gear away from that now. So that's good, but there is still a lot of that misconception out there. I mean, even just general exercise misconceptions, like when I was training the mothers in the study, and they would always tell me, I do not want to get into the resistance group because they would just be like, I don't want to look like you.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, you're not. You're not. You do not have the DNA and the coding to do this. And plus, we're not doing a hypertrophy.
Yeah.
You're doing muscular endurance, and
It doesn't just happen by accident. You don't just accidentally become a bodybuilder.
Right, exactly. And so I will say that on the resistance side of things, there's misconceptions about that, even in the general population about, if you lift weights, are going to get huge. It's like, no, that's not true. It's, there's a whole multitude of factors. I mean, hell, even just being a muscle, an exercise responder versus non-responder. There's people out there that work as hard as they can, and they're doing everything they're supposed to, and they don't gain a lot of muscle. And then there's people that just even think about lifting a weight and they gain 10 pounds. Right? So it's just, it's just, I'm obviously using examples that are not really true. They're way out there.
Yeah, I know.
So just for the listeners out there, but so there's a little bit of misconception with resistance training that I'm hoping that we can kind of get away from, because we've seen that resistance training is actually really beneficial for like the blood pressure stuff. We've seen a higher correlation. I mean, all exercise is good for decreasing the blood pressure and maintaining the blood pressure where we need it during pregnancy. but resistance training has been seen to be a little bit more effective at systole. So that's a good. So yeah, it's really that resistance training side of things, and but yeah, the fear of injury is one of them. People are afraid of, injuring not only themselves, but obviously their fetus and their unborn child, their offspring, while exercising. But if you have safeguards in place and you're doing things properly, there's really no risk there's always risk when you're doing anything, really. I mean, if you're not, you can be laying in bed and house falls on you. I don't know. There's always inherent risk to things. And it's tough to kind of get some of them over that hurdle. But when they start seeing the benefits of what they really can see and do, then it changes things a little bit. Then they kind of, because everyone that gets pregnant, all these mothers, they want to do what's right for their baby. It's really rare to see someone that is just like, I don't care that I'm pregnant, and then they're doing, the drinking, smoking, and all that. I mean, it happens, which is sad, but for the most part, most people that get pregnant, they're like, now it's two of them.
Yeah.
Right? And so they know that anything that they do, that's also for their baby. So now when we're getting this information out there about exercise is not only safe, but super beneficial for the babies. I mean, it helps. It helps to get them over those barriers and that fear of getting that help. And it's really nice that since we're offering free personal training through this study, that's one of the barriers that we eliminate, right? Because it's always cost sometimes for individuals. So that's another thing. In time, we see a lot of them that, they're mothers, they're busy, and a lot of them are working now, so it makes it a little bit harder and more challenging for a lot of these mothers to get out there and work out. So, it's tough. It's tough to get them to be active. I think there's only been 10% of pregnant women actually meet the guidelines.
Wow.
So, yeah. But we're seeing all these positive effects. So I do hope that it becomes more and more prevalent in the OBG world. Okay. I have seen it. So personally, like our family doctor was also Sammy's OB, and she was a big proponent with exercise. And I was like, oh, this is what I do.
Yeah.
So it was perfect for us. But yeah, and then it's, we talk about the God, again, I can't remember the term, but the abdominal splitting, that's another one that people kind of fear. And again, if you're not really doing the things you're not supposed to, that's not going to happen. Right. So it's just little things like that. And, people being really scared of pregnant women. I mean, there's plenty of people out there that are actually like legitimately afraid of pregnant women. And it's like, they're durable. They're fine. It's like same with the babies. They're so flexible in the utero environment that you don't have to be too worried about it. So it's, just kind of getting over those fears is kind of a big one.
Yeah, I hear you. That's, and it does sound very similar to like the general population. So I feel like, well, do you have more questions?
No, that was,
The like big takeaways that I took are, I did not expect the impacts that exercise has just on the general public to be the same as what happens in Europe, but it makes perfect sense. I mean, that's crazy to me. So everything we're talking about with the benefits of exercise is happening to the fetus and has an impact on them lifelong.
Yeah.
That's crazy to me. And the fact that, you said it's safe to start exercise no matter if you're sedentary before you get pregnant. And it's safe to start. It's recommended to start moderate. And it's also super detrimental if you're exercising already and then you become sedentary during pregnancy. Those were kind of the big takeaways for me.
Yeah. Well, going on that, I did have a question. So you were saying more endurance training for pregnant women. So you don't want to go hypertrophy at all, correct? Or strength. So you don't want to do you can do that? Okay.
I mean, you shouldn't be doing powerlifting by any means.
Yeah, so kind of more of like a
you should be doing 1 rep maxes. I mean,
Okay.
if you're more than happy to do some, some reps in the 8 to 10 range, absolutely.
Okay.
That's completely fine. I mean, I just wouldn't suggest anything that's going to elicit like that really high blood pressure effect, right? Those
Yeah.
increases in blood pressure. So that's where I mentioned like not doing that inclined leg press. I mean, we did have some moms do a little bit of that, but they were really lightweight, right? So
Yeah.
as long as you're not doing like power stuff, I don't see any issues with even doing some hypertrophy training.
You haven't seen it. Yeah, you haven't seen any cases of any risks or anything with. Okay. So
No.
endurance and hypertrophy are good.
Yeah,
Strength, not so much. Okay.
yeah. I mean, you still gain strength.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
on
A
that
power
training as
lift.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's yeah, I just wouldn't be doing 1 rep maxes on under the bench press or the squat. Right? Those are the types of things to stay away from, obviously.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you're doing it just a general resistance training, you're going to get strength. I mean, our moms increase in their strength throughout the 20 weeks that we have them. We get them at 13 to 16 weeks, and they'll go all the way until they deliver. Like I said, we had a mom that delivered an hour after her workout. I mean, we see them increase. You know, we typically would stay in the 12 to 15 range for our study just for just for staying in what we want to do. So it's keeps it what's the word I'm looking for? Comparable. So we're not just doing random resistance stuff, right? So we can keep it comparable so we know what we're doing and we can keep the protocol. But we do see moms that, when they're on their third set, they don't get to 10, they get to 8, right? So we elicit more of that hypertrophic as response, and that's fine. So, but yeah, again, it's just the 1 rep max stuff, the really high intense stuff, because that's vigorous. We want to stay away from that. But,
Sure.
Can you overtrain? I'm pretty sure you could overtrain it. Do you want to see people doing only 3 to 5 days a week, or can people that are addicted to the gym, like some people are, like 6 to 7 days a week? Like, is there any effect, like negative effects to that overtraining? I mean,
So,
overtraining isn't great, but I know some
right.
people just need to be in the gym every day.
So I do. So I would say that it probably would follow the same kind of effects as overtraining syndrome. We would start probably seeing the things like the increase in the cortisol rise, and then they can start getting sick, and then starting to see the more detrimental effects where, they're seeing decreases in performance in the gym and everything like that. I would say that they're probably a little more predisposed to it just because of what's already going on, with like, the difference, it's pregnancy on average is about 83,000 extra kcals.
Yeah. You're burning
So,
like 300 more calories a day, right?
yeah,
Typically.
well, and that's another thing too, is it's not just that cut and dry. That's a whole nother thing with pregnancy.
Yeah, I guess
people right away when they're, think about like right away when someone's pregnant at conception, you just have this tiny little cell. Most of it is just developing, right? That's the neural system, all that, and they're actually just developing structures, and they're not growing. But then when you get later into pregnancy, then that's where you start upticking more kcal being burned. So that is another misconception that we didn't even touch on, is like nutrition. Is people that they start going, I'm eating for 2. You're not eating for 2. You are not eating for 2. We're exercise training for 2, which is amazing, right? We get a 2-for-1 right there with exercise training. That's awesome. But you are not eating for 2.
Yeah.
So that was like some intervention, not really intervention, but we had to talk to our moms a little bit about is, you eat a little bit more, but your body's going to tell you kind of how much you really need. And they're going to be hungrier when they need the kcals, because it's like, they're going to feel that. So you eat a little bit more, and like you were right, Luke, it is roughly about 300 extra kcals, an extra peanut butter sandwich in there. That's going to help, right? But if you're hungry, then the baby's hungry. That's how it kind of goes. And again, it's 83,000 throughout but it increases, especially when we get to that growth phase. But then again, remember, you're storing a lot, and then we release it at the end. We go from anabolic to catabolic. So yeah, that's another actually misconception, is that eating for 2. It's, you are eating for another entity. That is true, but it's not
it's not like you're doubling your calorie intake. Sure.
Which some moms will do. Some moms will overeat, and so then it's like you're kind of. We had one mom that would go and have a cupcake or ice cream right after working out, and it just drove me nuts. She's like, "That's my treat for doing it." I'm like, "You're just canceling out what we're doing." I mean, the baby is still going to be better off, but at the same time, you're like, "Oh, stop doing that, please." But yeah, so again, there's that, the eating for 2, but the training for 2, and then the resistance stuff. Just being smart about it and keeping it in that moderate domain. But again, in those that are more in that vigorous domain, if they are exercise trained to do a lot of those types of lifting and that's what they love to do, I would probably guess that they would have to decrease a little bit. And they
Okay.
would start feeling that little bit of decrease there, rather than like in the aerobic side. The aerobic is really easy to kind of moderate, but the resistance isn't so much.
Hmm.
But as pertaining to your over training syndrome, I would imagine that they'd be a little bit more predisposed if they were
Okay.
to continue 7 days a week. They would really want to probably get a day off in there.
Okay.
Sweet.
Mhm.
Well, this was awesome. I
Yeah.
mean, I learned so much
Yeah.
on this.
Mhm.
So thanks a ton, Cody, for
Yeah.
sharing all this, and I'm excited for our listeners to get to hear it. I do think this is going to be one of those topics where we're going
Yeah.
to get a lot of questions coming in.
Oh yeah.
And so somewhere down the line, would you be willing to sit down again?
Yeah. Yeah. Just let me know if there's a bunch of questions that come out. Be more than happy to do my best at answering them. Maybe I'll learn a little bit about protein.
No, tough. All right.
I mean, there's just so much.
Yeah, I bet.
I didn't talk about like the PUFAs all that much, but maybe some little downstream stuff of what we see with exercise training, like normal stuff, like with the GLUT4 translocates, right, to the cell membrane. We have different phosphorylation of like AMPK alpha 1. So, it's just a lot of the downstream stuff that might even be too much.
So
Again, that's a little bit more about my
are you referring to the insulin independent glucose uptake in the cell with GLUT4 translocation? We've covered that on an episode on resistance training about how like exercise is able to independently regulate glucose without the use of insulin. Is that what you were referring to?
Yeah, and so we actually see a little bit of that with the fetus as well. So they're more
crazy.
sensitive. So they actually have a greater insulin sensitivity when they're born.
Wow.
Yeah, because it's all coded. It's all this it's genotype versus phenotype, right?
Mhm.
You have what's there, but then when you get like a DNA methylation or phosphorylation somewhere on an enzyme or wherever, then it's going to either activate or deactivate something. So it's like those fatty acid transfer binding proteins that I talked about, or transport proteins. They get either activated or deactivated. We can, have those, like we talked about the mitochondrial stuff, right? The better activation and more complete beta oxidation of fats versus less oxidation. That all comes down to, expressing the phenotypes that's already there and letting the environment kind of dictate what needs to happen, what the fetus is going to walk into when it gets born.
Yeah.
So that's
It makes so much sense. But
I know, right? It's kind of like when because it was Linda that did the fetal heart rate and heart rate variability study. At 36 weeks, they saw the exercise training response that at 36 weeks, those that exercised, the infant had lower heart rate, but higher heart rate variability, which is what you want to see. And so and then again, we talked about, you see those negative effects like high lipids, high lipodensity proteins getting the fatty aortic streaks, atherosclerosis right there. But exercise can lower triglycerides and mitigate LDL increases. So
that's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was awesome, dude. I'm like pumped that we got to do this. This is I learned way more than I thought I was going to.
Yeah, I had very little knowledge on this, but this is great.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you guys, when you have more questions, if they come in about it, then let me know, and I can certainly, send me those questions along, and I can do my best to answer them. Or if
Do you have
not, I
any
can find
like
someone.
closing remarks for a pregnant individual that is looking to do exercises that is just kind of shy about all the risks? Just any closing remarks for the listeners?
So, for anyone that's kind of nervous about exercising, if even just the littlest things of getting, the fit principle that we looked at, we do see that intensity is kind of one of always the most important factor. But getting those met minutes, even if they're at lower intensities, we do want to get into that moderate zone, and we want to increase those met minutes, because that's really that's where we start seeing those effects, especially in that moderate domain. But you got to remember that it is very safe. Even just treadmill walking or walking outside at a brisk walking pace is enough to elicit a moderate response. It doesn't take a whole lot to get to that bare minimum level. And yet we're starting, and we see these very positive effects even at those levels. I mean, obviously more is always going to be better. And the more that we can do, the better off our babies are. I mean, we're trying to create super babies here.
Yeah.
That's really what it is. And it's
Got to get that NHL draft.
Yeah.
I know, right? My first overall pick's at home climbing up on everything right now. And so he's but yeah, I wish that there wasn't as much reservations as there are with it. And people need to kind of not get over it. They need to realize that it is so beneficial for that, not only them, but then for their babies as well. We're doing an intervention through prevention, or prevention through intervention here. We're setting up the babies to be leaner and healthier and lowering the risk of obesity. We've seen that obesity in children has risen since the 80s to 2000. There was something like 5% of 5-year-olds, I think, were or what was it, 3 to 5-year-olds, like 5% were obese, and now it's like 15%.
Jeez.
I mean, it's significantly increased, and it's, we kind of have this twofold factor of our diets are gotten to shit, and then now and we're exercising less. We have more sedentary lifestyles, more sedentary jobs, and that is going around in the general population. But now we're starting to see that, again, the obesity begets obesity thing, what you are is being implanted on your child. But even those, like the mouse study I brought up, those that are obese already, but if they're exercising, we're changing, right? Mm-hmm. We're doing those DNA methylation and the phosphorylation that's occurring. We're changing some of those, what are they? I think like some heat shock protein stuff will occur. We have these interleukins that are being sent out, and, these IGF factors, all these different downstream stuff that we know happens in exercise gets implanted on the fetus. Mm-hmm. So they're getting these exercise effects, and they're actually getting protected from some of maybe the past, the past negative risk factors that you've indulged in, right?
Sure.
These modifiable risk factors. So it's, you really are, it's exercising for two. It's exercising for yourself and the fetus and your offspring, and you're kind of giving them a head start in life. But if you continue on these negative paths, these negative modifiable risk factors, you're just setting them up to have a harder life. So, I mean, you're predisposing them to this obesity and diabetes. And, I don't even think we talked about hospital stay, right? So, and I mean, just monetarily, let's think about it this way. If an individual is exercising, they're more likely to deliver at term. But we've also seen that hospital stays for those that exercise are anywhere between 1 to 2 days. But those that are sedentary, we start seeing 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days. And longer hospital stays actually exponentially increase in price. So the longer you stay in the hospital after being pregnant, the more like exponentially increase in price.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for those hospital stays. So right there, I mean, if you're money driven, right there, that's a huge factor there. So you have a healthier baby, you're saving money. Everyone loves hearing that. And you're healthier for it too. And then you maybe even develop this positive habit that you can continue on. Yeah. In fact, even in the pregnancy study, we allow the moms whenever they're ready, because they tell you about 6 weeks before they can start doing physical activity again. After 6 weeks, we let them come back to the gym for 6 months, and they can keep training there for free. So, I mean, we want to keep
them sweet,
healthy and happy. And but again, we're trying to create super babies here.
Yeah. I love it.
Cody, weren't you on TV though? Aren't you famous now?
Oh yeah.
I think I saw your post. Yeah, it was like, what was that show?
So actually, it was kind of funny when I was on paternity leave, and I come back and I was just kind of doing some random stuff, and then my boss said, "Oh, the 1,000-pound sisters are coming. Like, we wish we'd have you because I'm like a little bit more personable and all that." And I was like, "Oh, you will see." And I went and talked to Sammy, and she goes, "You need to go and do that," because she watches the show.
That's awesome, dude.
And so I got here, and they set me up with a mic and everything, and I put him through the bot pod. It was an all day thing. Like, I was there from like 10 a.m. until about 4 p.m. Jeez. And they only showed about 15 minutes of it. There was a few little things that I was like, ooh, I said that wrong, but they luckily cut that out.
Oh, good.
And they also made like a big deal about something in there, like, where the camera's like all zoomed in on the gal and everything, and was just like, I was like, oh no, what did I do? So I basically asked her to take a necklace off from the before she went into the bod pod because it has all these magnets. She's like, do I have to take my necklace off? I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's metal, so we want to just take that off and all that. And so all of a sudden, that's when the camera, and then she's like, starts like kind of like getting emotional. I'm like, what just happened? And they go, so is this the first time you've taken this necklace off since Caleb died? Which
Oh, no.
last season. I was like, oh no.
Shit.
And so this is before season 5 had even came out. So Caleb was still alive during season 5. And all I'm thinking is, oh my God, if he dies and then the next scene they show me to asking her to take a necklace off,
You're the bad guy.
like such a
Yeah. Oh
and so
my
I'm just
God.
like, oh no. And so like every episode, I'm just watching him survive. And I felt so bad, but I'm like, dude, you are gonna make this so bad for me.
That's so
But they ended the season right
Oh,
as the
Jesus.
funeral, and then the first episode of the 6th season. So it looked like that there was another.
Oh,
But they didn't show that part at all. But
Dude, that's so
yeah, it was an experience. So I did that. You know, I did have like a 9 million view Instagram thing too for our anti-gravity treadmills we have here. So
really?
Instagram famous too, I guess.
Nice.
Did you share that on Facebook?
I don't think I shared the other one. It was just some gal from admissions. She
Yeah.
posted it on her Instagram, and some of the like a clip site took it. You know
Oh,
how
nice.
they just see those things and then they dispersed it. And yeah, it had something like 9 million views, which was pretty cool. We also and kind of talking about the pregnancy study. It's been featured on Good Morning America.
Oh,
So a few years ago, it was featured on there, one of our studies, and then one of our cardiac studies actually got picked up by Runner's World, too.
Wow.
So
I'm totally gonna I mean, we're in the presence of royalty right
Yeah,
now.
I
I'm
was
totally
gonna
putting
say,
that in my bio.
no. I just ride the coattails of everyone else.
Well, that's working.
I'm just the face.
That's working. That's awesome. Yeah, thanks again.
yeah.
Absolutely, guys.
This was great.
No,
And
thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. I got to talk about my favorite topic myself, and then I'm just kidding. But no, this is really important stuff, and it's really cool what you guys are doing. So yeah,
take it easy.
yeah, you guys
Go
let me know.
wild.
Go wild. Yeah.
Go wild, yeah.
Let's do it.
Thanks again for tuning in to the Kickback Science Podcast. We love talking science with all of you, and if you feel the same, you can support us by subscribing, hitting that like button, and giving us a follow on our social media pages. Don't forget, you can submit questions through our website and in the comments section of all our social media. Have a good one, everyone.